Well, I'm available to start at right tackle.
You can't see when I close on.
All right.
Well, there's not an even playing field. There's never been an even playing field. There never will be an even playing field.
What shampoo do you use on your hair?
You don't need to be Superman to play in this offense.
You're listening to The Red Zone.
Welcome, Badgers fans, to another episode of The Red Zone. We are back after a couple-week hiatus since the Big Ten Championship game, and we are joined by Jesse Temple from Land of 10, a third-time guest?
I think I'm in the three-timers club. It's
it's
an honor and a privilege.
It's an exclusive club. And
Happy to be here.
Well, Jesse, we haven't talked, on the podcast since the Big Ten Championship loss. Obviously, people took that pretty hard. I think the fan base took it pretty hard. They were pretty disappointed to be in the Orange Bowl, which is kind of funny to think about when the Orange Bowl is pretty much the best you can hope for if you don't make the playoffs. But from talking to the team these last couple of weeks, what do you feel like they're pretty much just have put that loss behind them? Do you feel like that it's going to be an issue at all going into this game as far as motivation and things like that?
I don't see it being any kind of issue with this team. Obviously, everybody was devastated, and we were there outside the locker room when they trotted the players out after the Big Ten Championship game. Completely understandable. It's the biggest game these guys will ever play. They have a chance to go to the playoffs, and they're sitting there talking about a loss. But I think people forget 18 to 23-year-old guys are able to get over this stuff a lot faster than fans and maybe coaches too, because they know they've got another opportunity. And just in talking to the players, once they got about 8 full days away, because we talked to them again that following Sunday, they didn't want to think about football. I think Derek Tyndall said he just watched a lot of cartoons. By that time, they were ready to focus on playing another football game, and they realized it's a great opportunity. They get to go down to Miami, and they still have a chance to achieve some special things by winning a 13th game. So, yeah, it's not the college football playoff, but if you're going to measure it by whether you're there or not, then you're going to have 100-plus teams that are really disappointed that they're not in the playoff.
Yeah, and, I was one of the people last year who thought that would be an issue. Blowing a 21-point lead at Penn State, having to play a team like Western Michigan in Dallas, it just seemed like a spot where they maybe wouldn't be quite as motivated as you would think Western Michigan would be. And I was wrong. I think, when that game started last year, Wisconsin came to play, and they got up early, and they played as well as you would hope they would. And so I think coming into this game, although the playoffs were more right there for them, I feel like this is, this feels like a bigger game against a team like Miami, a big name program. And I also felt like the mood after the Big Ten Championship game was a little different this year. Obviously they were extremely disappointed, but I think when we talked to those players after the Penn State game, it was more there was a more shock and disbelief sort of attitude to it. It was sort of like, it felt more devastating for them to lose to Penn State, in my opinion, just from talking to them right after the game, than it did this time. And I think maybe part of that just comes from, blowing a 21-point lead, thinking that you had won the Big Ten Championship. And, although they still wouldn't have gone to the playoffs last year, I think that this one may have been a little bit, just slightly more easier for them to get over. Not saying it was easy, but I think you can walk away from that Ohio State game saying, Ohio State was the better team on the day, and they just weren't able to get it done. Whereas the Penn State game, you blew that huge lead. So I think that's kind of I think it's a little different than last year. I think they'll be fine too. I agree with you there. Looking at this matchup, what are you kind of interested to see here? Obviously, Miami is a team that, as their defense has been living off turnovers. Their offense is pretty balanced, I would say. What do you think is kind of whether it's a key to this game, or what do you find interesting about this matchup?
Well, I'm curious to see how Wisconsin's offense handles that Miami defense, because there are a couple stats that when you look at it, you go, wow, like that's pretty interesting. That Miami's forced 30 turnovers, which I think is tied for second in the FBS. And I know there's been a lot of talk about that turnover chain, the 10-karat gold massive chain that they wear. But Wisconsin has uncharacteristically turned the ball over 23 times this year. So it's like, is this the perfect setup for Miami to take advantage of it and make the Badgers look bad? And the other thing is that Miami is averaging more sacks per game than any team in the country, 3.58 per game. So Wisconsin's been very good defensively in its own right, getting sacks, but so many guys on Miami's team have multiple sacks. And so it's going to be the toughest challenge that this offensive line has faced, right up there with Ohio State. And we all know Alex Hornibrook needs time in the pocket. You certainly don't want to see him outside the pocket. And we've seen him struggle when he's not able to set his feet. And you can say that about a lot of quarterbacks, but I think this is going to be the most difficult challenge that the offense has faced. So that's just one side. But really, it's all facets. How's the defense going to respond after we all thought this is the best defense maybe Wisconsin's ever had, and then didn't really have a very good first half against Ohio State? Is Miami going to come up with some plays that make them look bad? So it's going to be exciting on all sides.
Yeah, I think the turnovers is interesting. I mean, I just posted something today. You can see it on madison.com about the turnovers that Miami's forced, and you rattled off a lot of the stats that I had in the story. But I mean, 21 of their 30 turnovers came in the last 6 regular season games. It's a defense that not only is up there, I think tied for second in the country in turnovers forced for the year, but most of those came in the second half, and they really turned it on. I think they had 4 straight games where they forced 4 turnovers. So that's the biggest key in this game. I mean, if Wisconsin, now somebody on Twitter told me today that if Wisconsin doesn't turn the ball over, that they'll win 35-0, and I definitely don't agree with that. I don't think they're going to blow them out or anything, even if they play a clean game. But if Wisconsin goes out there and turns the ball over 2 or 3 times, it's going to make it really difficult for them to win. And they've kind of been living on the edge in that respect this entire season. And it came back to bite them a little bit in the Ohio State game when they had that early interception in the red zone. But I think Jonathan Taylor's got to hold on to the ball. Alex Hornibrook's got to make smart decisions, and the offensive line has got to protect him. And I think if they're able to do that, they're going to have a lot better chance to win. So again, they've got a chance for the 13th win. It could be a program record, and I think that they're going to be motivated for this game, especially defensively, like you said. And we'll see if they can do it. We'll see if they can play a clean game. We mentioned earlier, about them, just missing out on the playoffs this year and the disappointment from the last game. But where do you think they go from here? Obviously they've got this game against Miami, but looking ahead to next year, they're going to have probably 10 offensive starters back. They're going to have some holes to fill defensively, but it seems like a couple of those positions they'll be able to fill pretty well. I think if Nick Nelson leaves cornerback could be a little bit of an issue, but do you think this team can be as good, maybe going forward as they've been these last couple of years?
I don't see why not. Obviously, you have to catch some breaks, and a lot was made about Wisconsin's schedule this year, but I think there was reason why people were talking about that. I sometimes I do wonder what, and this is maybe a aside here, but what would Wisconsin's record be like if it was in the Big Ten East and had to play all those teams? And but the goal every year at this point where Wisconsin's program is to win the Big Ten West and get into the conference championship game. And I'm fine saying that should be the goal for the next 10 years, because that's where the Badgers are at this point. That's where the Big Ten West is at this point. So I don't know about the college football playoff and competing for a national championship, because, like I said, I feel like everything has to break right for a team like Wisconsin to get there. And this was one of those few times where they were right on the cusp of it and everything was in front of them. And so it's an interesting, I feel like, position if you're a Badgers fan, because for so long the team was terrible in the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s. And then you get to this point where you've pretty much accomplished everything that you could accomplish other than vying for a national title, and you just want to see the program get there. But it's not easy, and I can't definitively say that just because they went 12-0 in this regular season, it's going to be there for them in the next couple of years. So maybe that doesn't directly answer your question, but I think they'll still be good. There's definitely a lot of questions defensively. The defensive line, especially defensive end, they're going to have to figure out, losing 3 seniors that have been rotating in there and in the secondary. But it's going to be a good team that should compete for the West. I know that.
Yeah, and I think you answered the question. I mean, I think there's a section of the fan base that has gotten a little bit spoiled by these last couple of years, or maybe it's more that nothing's ever going to be kind of good enough. Because I think there's some people that, like I said, are disappointed that they're in this Orange Bowl and that they're complaining about why they weren't able to get in the playoffs, and it's like, I mean, to come this far is quite an accomplishment for this program. I mean, there's not every year you go into a New Year's Six bowl. I mean, they've been able to do that the last couple of years, and they've been able to be in playoff contention the last couple of years. But that's not easy to do for any program, really. And Wisconsin, there's no guarantee they're going to be in playoff contention in the following years. I mean, I think the coaching staff and the players could all do a great job, and they could be sitting there at, you know, in the 9-3, 10-2 range, not really threatening to get in the playoffs. And that's where Wisconsin has been for a long time, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's consistent success, and Wisconsin's done that for a long time. But I think that fans need to kind of enjoy these 2 seasons, enjoy this Orange Bowl, and hope that they can get to that level in the coming years. And I'm pretty optimistic looking at it right now about their prospects for next year. They do have to play, I think, at Michigan and at Penn State. So the schedule is going to be a little more difficult, but I do think they're going to be able to replace some of those holes defensively, and I think they could be a really good team again next year. But it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of develop.
I do think it's interesting just about like fan bases and people not being happy. Part of me thinks that's human nature, and there are just going to be some people that are always going to find reason to nitpick. Like, the team is 12-0, and you want to talk about Alex Hornibrook's interception rate, which understandable, but that it's going to be the downfall of this team. And it's like, but haven't you enjoyed this ride of this 12-0 start? And I feel like I wrote a lot about that this season, and talked about it too, that I hope fans were able to appreciate this season for what it was, because I think the national perspective of this is it's the same old Wisconsin team. They were a very good team that couldn't get over the hump. But I think if you're in this and you're a fan and you see this, you realize that something like this doesn't happen every season. So yes, they're not in the playoff, but they are 12-1. They're playing in a prestigious bowl game with, as we said, the opportunity to win 13 games for the first time in school history. So hopefully people who are listening to this are of the opinion that this is something that should be celebrated and appreciated, and not looked at the other way.
By the way, 18 months ago, people were picking this team to go 6-6 or 7-5.
That's right.
And we were those people. Actually, I picked 8-4 that year, but I mean, most people were thinking, oh, they're going to struggle to make a bowl game, and they had this, surprise season last year and then nearly make the playoffs this year. So enjoy it while you can. Hopefully it continues. I think they're in good hands with Paul Chryst, but you never know what the future is going to hold. We did have the early signing period recently, and that's something that's obviously new this year. It was really interesting, especially since Wisconsin had, everything locked up. So I mean, I again, we can't really predict how good these guys are going to be or how good the class is, and you're kind of spinning your wheels if you try to do that. But how much do you think this benefits Wisconsin to have an early signing period, to have a class that, a class of 19 kids that are already signed, and do you think it allows Wisconsin to kind of get ahead of the game for the next cycle?
I think it's fantastic, and I wrote about this not too long ago, that Wisconsin is uniquely positioned to succeed because of this early signing period in ways that a lot of other schools that are upset about it aren't. And that, like, two of the most outspoken coaches against the early signing period are Nick Saban at Alabama and Urban Meyer at Ohio State. And one of Saban's contentions, which he talked about, I think, this week during the signing period, was that it's not fair because it doesn't give kids the best opportunity to find the best school. Like, if you're hanging around waiting for an offer from an SEC school and it comes along in January, well, now you don't have that opportunity. And Urban Meyer's biggest contention was the NFL early entrant draft deadline is January 15th, and he's given these scholarship offers to kids, and he can't tell them if there's going to be a spot because he doesn't know if 8 of his players are going to declare, if they're going to come back, and if they come back, then there's not a spot. That is some serious college football first world problems for about 5 programs in the country. But for Wisconsin, it's great because the Badgers identify talent early. They get these kids committed. Of these 19 commits, 18 were committed by July 6th, so that's at least 5 months. Reggie Pearson Jr. committed in August of 2016. So these guys are ready, and they want to sign with Wisconsin. And that's a big part of it. And in getting all these 19 players, that allows the coaching staff to identify maybe 1 or 2 guys that they can really make a run for up until National Signing Day in February. And also get a start on 2019 and 2020 because the recruiting cycle does never end. So for Wisconsin, it's great. But they're not hanging around waiting for the 5-star guys that fall through the cracks, because they don't get 5-star guys, and they rarely get 4-star guys. Jack Sanborn, the inside linebacker from Illinois, is the only 4-star player in this class. So overall, if you're Wisconsin, you're very happy with this early signing period. And if you're one of those schools that are going after 5-star guys that are waiting till the last minute because every school in the country wants them, you are less excited.
Yeah, and, look, I think this is a disadvantage for the Alabamas and Ohio States of the world, and I definitely don't blame Urban Meyer and Nick Saban for speaking out against it and trying to, I guess, argue for what's best for their program in the situation they're in. But like you said, this is for almost every program and every kid, this seems like a definitely a positive thing. And, if for the kids, if you want to wait till February, you can wait till February. If you're waiting on, if you think you can get another offer in January, then you can just wait. You don't have to commit before February. You don't have to sign before February. So I think it's a good thing all the way around, except for, like you said, the few programs who probably don't need help anyway.
Right.
So,
that's another good thing about, Wisconsin, because let's use Nakia Watson, the running back from Austin, Texas, as an example. Wisconsin was his best offer, his only Power 5 offer when he committed to the Badgers. He goes out during his senior season and is completely dominant in Texas high school football, leads his team to the state semifinal game. You put a performance together like that for a season, and all of a sudden you're going to draw the attention of other in-state schools, hypothetically, Texas, Texas Tech, Texas A&M. If you have this early sign, or you don't have this signing period and national signing days in February, that's 7 additional weeks where other schools can come in and try to poach committed players that Wisconsin has had. So by having him sign on Wednesday, as he did, or December 20th, you're locking him up and preventing these other schools from coming in. So that's another reason why it's really, really good for Wisconsin, because if you are Ohio State or Alabama or whatever, maybe you see these kids that completely outperform what you thought they would during their senior year, and then you try and get them when they were committed to a place like Wisconsin. So, if you're Paul Chryst, you couldn't be happier about the early signing period. And as he said, after his last media availability before heading out to the Orange Bowl, you find out if a commitment is real on both sides. That's why he likes the early signing period. I do think it's not necessarily completely beneficial for the player, because let's say you decide not to sign in the early signing period, then you have a coaching staff questioning you about, are you really committed? Because we offered you this scholarship, and if you're not willing to sign now, what does that mean? So, there's arguments to be made on both sides, but on the whole for Wisconsin, it's been fantastic.
Yeah, I actually talked to some prospects for some Wisconsin commitments back in the summer, and one of the guys told me, I'm just going to wait till February because I want to sign with the rest of my class. And I think this was right after they had kind of passed the early signing period, so I think some people weren't really sure what they were, how it was going to work yet. And so I was pretty surprised to see all 19 commitments signed, and I think that's so big for Wisconsin. So I think that again, they always get ahead in recruiting. They have a lot of commitments early. They already have 5 for 2019, and so they're going to keep getting ahead of the game. And obviously they still haven't got too many 4 or 5 star kids, and a lot of fans complain about that, but I think they've done pretty good in recruiting, and obviously they do a great job of developing their guys too. But thanks for joining me, Jesse. You're definitely welcome back next year as well, or in the off season, so we'll definitely do this again. But thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on, Jason. It's an honor and a privilege.
That's going to do it for this week. A big thanks to Jesse for coming on the podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Jesse Temple, and follow me at Jason_Galloway. We are going to be doing one more post-game live chat after the Orange Bowl on Saturday. It'll be pretty late since the game's a night game, but follow me on Twitter, and I'll let you guys know, exactly what I'm going to be going on and taking your questions and getting some post-game reaction from you guys. Also, keep visiting madison.com for all of our coverage throughout this week, and I will talk to you later.